Welcome to a series of talks about information systems and the effect that it has on organizations and especially our daily lives. We're going to look at information systems and how it can be applied and how it's actually used in various contexts. And as we go through with the discussion, we're going to learn about various systems that's available and how people interact and use these systems and especially information. So let's start off our discussion by just getting an idea of what we're going to look at. It's important to realize that nowadays, every individual, any company, all organizations, governments, etc., need to manage the information and how they use that information. We very often hear about companies that have lost information due to attacks or viruses, and that they devastated, that they have trouble gaining momentum again and then making money. So information and information systems in particular has gained a lot of importance in our daily lives. So what are we going to look at? We're going to look at various types of information systems, just the basics, and we're going to see where and why we're going to use each of these systems. We're going to look at some of the issues and challenges that should be overcome, especially in a global marketplace. We need to look at some of the benefits and problems and issues associated with information systems, the role that it plays within organizations. We're going to touch on perhaps where it fits into a value chain. We're going to look at change models, which talks about people adopting to information systems and that whole process. Are they scared of it? What are some of the issues, implications, etc.? We're also going to look at the global challenges that we face. It's important to realize that in today's world, we are actually conducting business or interactions with people around the country, around Africa, around the world. So all of these aspects will be looked at. Now let's start off by talking about first subtopic, information concepts. Very often people get confused with the basic terms of data, information and knowledge. We're going to address these, but before we do that, it's important that we realize that information has actually obtained a lot of value. If I tell you that in half an hour's time, I'm going to delete all your content on your cell phone, I can bet you that most of you won't be happy with me. The reason being, you're going to lose your photographs, your messages, your contacts, all that information. So just that shows you already that information has gained a lot of value and importance. Now more so with organizations. If a company loses, let's say for argument's sake, the list of products that they sell or the number of clients, their client details, they're going to be in very difficult situation and they might probably fail due to that. Now let's continue and talk about the three definitions. The first one we're going to touch on is data. Now data is any information that helps us to represent real world things. If I give you a number 021-959-1234. That is data. Currently we don't really know what it is. We can make assumptions. So that is a raw fact. That's something that I want to record. Now in this case that might represent a random telephone number. And now I've given a little more value to that. And that takes us to our next definition, information. Information can be categorized as facts that's organized in a certain way in order for them to have more value. For example, if I take your cell phone and I look at your contact list, your address book, I can get an indication of who the people are that you regularly like to contact. So where we had the raw data, just the individual telephone numbers, now I can associate more information with that telephone number and I can start to get a picture of your close group that you like to communicate with. If we look at the other example, in companies, they might want to look at sales information. What were the sales of the previous week? Who was the best salesperson? Which products did we sell most? So all of that actually becomes information. Now, data and information cannot exist on its own. We need to realize that data, for it to become information, it should be processed. So it should go through a set of logical steps, and then that will transfer it from data into information. Same thing with your cell phone again. If you want to add a new contact, you're going to accept data from that person, and by typing it in your address book, your contact list, you are actually transferring or creating or setting it up to become information. Now, it's important to realize that information are usually there because it needs to achieve a goal or an outcome. Your contact list, the reason why you have it, you want to send messages to your friends, family, colleagues, or you want to go and make phone calls. So to summarize, there's the three things that we need to remember. Data should go through some sort of transformation to become information. When we give it a meaningful context, it becomes information. And then all information should have a purpose. Otherwise, it's going to be useless and you're not really going to use that information. Now, you may ask, what types of data can we find? Now, there's various types, and I'm going to tell you guys where we usually find these types of information. The first one is alphanumeric data. Now, these usually represent numbers, letters, and special characters. For example, if you type in a cell phone number, it's an alphanumeric data value that you're going to use. If you type in a surname and initials, same applies. Nowadays we work with emojis, smiley faces, sad faces. Those are also types of alphanumeric data. So that's different types of data that we can represent. The others which might be less obvious but are still data would include images. So if you have graphics, pictures, photographs, all those things. If it's just a photograph of a random person, we don't know who that is, it's data. If we take that same photograph and we say that is Susie, now it becomes information. We also find audio data, sounds, noises, tones. Imagine you hear a small sound clip, a bird chirping. If you just hear the sound, you might not realize what it is, so that's data. But if we now go and say that particular sound represents an eagle, we've actually attached meaning to that, and then it becomes information. If we look at a video, videos usually consist of moving images or pictures. If you think about animations, so it's a series of still images that are placed next to each other, that's played one after another, and that actually creates the actual video for you. Now, the next thing that we need to talk about is knowledge. So we've gone from data, we've processed it to turn it into information, and now if we start to use our information effectively, we're going to work with knowledge. So let's look at the definition. It can be defined as the awareness and understanding of information and the ways in which it can be made useful to support various tasks. So typically, if you're in a company and your boss asks you, they want to know the sales information for the last year in order to determine who the best salesperson is. You're going to look at the information, you're going to put it together, you're going to make assumptions based on that, you're going to turn it into knowledge, and then you will be able to give your boss an answer which will tell him what the relationships are between the various segments of information. For example, how much did each salesperson sell? During which months did they sell the most products? And then who the top person is. Now let's do this with a quick example. If I give you the following data, some of it we might recognize and we might try to assume what's going to happen with each of these sets. So if I talk about Johnson, immediately we can think, okay, that might be a surname or it might be a name. Then we have a number 359585892051243. That is a little difficult. So at this stage we don't really have a clue what that is. Then we see AF. So what is AF? Is it initials or is it a code for something more precisely? So at this stage we've got random data, but we don't know what the meaning of that is. Now I'm going to turn it into information. So if I tell you the following, the first section represents a student number, Johnson represents his surname, AF initials, 920512 is the date of birth, and then 43 is the mark. Do you guys see what I've just done? I've turned it into information. I've given it a little more meaning. Now let's take this and turn it into knowledge. If we have a particular rule and we know if a student or if a person doesn't get above 50%, they fail. For Mr. Johnson, we know that that mark is 43%. It is below 50%, therefore the student fails. So what we've done now is we've actually turned that into knowledge. So from here we can start to look at ways to try to get Mr. Johnson to either improve his marks or to retake a certain subject or module. Now, when we work with information, it's important to realize that information should adhere to certain characteristics. Now, there's about 11 of these characteristics. We're going to go through them one by one and just try to see how each one fits into the information context. So information is set that it should be accessible. So if people want access to the right information and if they have authorization, they should be able to access that information. For example, if you want to go and access your bank account details, the amount of money that you have in an account, that makes it accessible. Who should have access to that? Probably only the bank personnel as well as the account holder. Information should also be accurate. We expect it to be error-free. If we have information that is wrong, incorrect, we really can't use that information. What's the value that you're going to get out of it? There's no nice decisions that can flow out of that particular information. Again, coming back to the banks, your account, you expect them to ensure that your information is accurate so that the next time that you want to perhaps withdraw money, that you're able to go and do so. The third one, information should be complete. It should contain all the important facts so that it has meaning. For example, if your boss comes to you and they ask you to give you a list of all the students that passed, you need to make sure that you actually incorporate things like a student number. You might incorporate the name, the surname. You might need to incorporate the modules or the subjects, and very importantly, you need to incorporate the marks. If you leave, let's say, the marks and the modules out, that information doesn't have value because it's incomplete. The fourth one, information should be economical. Information shouldn't be too expensive to create. We hear about various situations where people go and they create systems and it takes them hundreds of thousands of rands, work hours, personnel, training, just in order to go and change the systems and to add new information. Typically, we need to ensure that information is as cheap as possible to recreate or to put into a system for that system to be feasible. The last one on this slide, information should be flexible. Can we use it in various ways? Now, typically, if you think about companies, whenever they have information, let's say for argument's sake brochure information, you can get it in print format. Some of the people put it in websites. They put it in other marketing material. They send it as part of SMSs, text messages. So in that case, they ensure that it's more flexible, that it can be used in multiple environments. Now, I'm going to come back to the example at the bottom after we finish the next list. The next series of characteristics that we need to look at, it should be relevant. Again, If you ask for information and they give you unnecessary information, there's no real purpose, there's no intention for you to use that information. So we need to ensure that that information that was requested is actually the information that will help you in order to get to a conclusion or to achieve a specific goal. It should be reliable. People should trust it. Again, if we talk about, let's say, bank information, every time you go there, you expect them to know your latest values or amounts that is saved in your account. So how much money do you actually have in your account? It should be secure. A lot of information that we do encounter nowadays are privileged information, and we need to make sure as individuals and as companies that we need to safekeep all of this information. We actually nowadays in South Africa have the POPI Act, the Privacy of Personal Information Act, which expects you to go and protect personal information. Information should also be simple. As soon as information becomes too complex, people tend not to use that information or try to bypass the way in which they use information. So we need to avoid those situations. It should be timely. For example, if you ask people what's the weather going to be like for the next week, you don't want them telling you the weather of 2 weeks ago, because what's the purpose of that? You need to plan for the week ahead. So ensure the timeliness of information. And then the very last one, information should be verifiable. If I go to my information and I need to check the validity of that information, can I actually go and do so? Can I account for all the information, all the changes that were made? So it should be able to be verified. Now I'm going to ask you, if we look at the following characteristics and we apply it to an identity number, do they actually adhere to that? So let's look at the previous slide again. Accessibility. That identity number will only be accessible to companies and people that actually wants to use it. Is it accurate? Your identity number is actually very unique, and the combination of numbers contained in there ensure that if somebody makes a mistake, that number by most systems would not be accepted. So it ensures the accuracy. Is it complete? If you go and you say, I want to get the date of birth of a person, you go to Home Affairs and you give an ID number, you need to give the complete ID number for them to identify that particular individual. Is it economical? How much does it cost to go and create that? Now initially you might think for the Department of Home Affairs it's very expensive because they need to issue the ID books and cards, they need to have their own systems, people need to pay to get those. So initially it might be a little expensive. But now compare it to, let's say, the post office that also uses that ID number. They haven't spent anything on that. They just ask you for your identification, scan it, type it in, and they start to use it. So for them it becomes economical. Is it flexible? It is. We can use it in various contexts. You can use it in companies. Many companies nowadays, especially banking, medical aid schemes, post office, etc., work with the identity number in order to go and identify you. Is it relevant? In most cases, yes, because it indicates or it allows them to link you up with that particular information. Is it reliable? Again, yes. Your identity number is unique, it can be verified, and it will indicate or show who you are. Is it secure? Again, the answer is yes, because only you have that particular ID number, and people generally can't reuse that. Same thing applies to simple and timely. Depending on the system, that number might apply to that particular environment. Now let's look at perhaps one of the last slides. If we look at the characteristics and we look at information, companies that don't adhere to these characteristics will typically not be able to make good decisions. So they might be making decisions that is wrong, come to incorrect conclusions, and ultimately it's going to cost them a lot of money. That information will have little value to them, and it will not allow them to achieve their goals. At this stage, this is where we're going to conclude the information concepts. In the next section, we're going to continue to talk about what is a system. So how can we use the information, the data, the knowledge, and apply it to systems. So we'll continue with the next section shortly.